welcome to another episode of Shadow Stories with me. That's me. I hope you are having a wonderful day today because I want to make you feel some things with this next story. Personally, it reminded me of a time in my youth when my ex-boyfriend and I would have date nights in a car, driving around for hours on end throughout the night. Aimlessly, we didn't have a destination in mind. We would just get in the car and drive. And we were content. That was all we needed. Oh, youth. Back to real life. We used to drive around so long that we would often get lost. And we would only turn around if we got to a dead end or reached a no trespassing sign. And I remember there were also times when the zone or the area we were in, did not get internet. So we couldn't even use GPS to get back. So we had to, work our way back to how we got there. And, such a fun mess. Good times, good times. But we didn't always drive around without direction. Sometimes we would follow cars around for a bit. He would ask me to choose a model or a color, and that was it. We would follow around a car and come up with stories about this person's life or the passengers in the car if it was more than just the driver. But we did have a rule. We would never follow the driver to their final destination. We would follow them for a few streets, a few lights, a few minutes, but then we would just turn around and keep driving aimlessly throughout the night. We didn't really need to follow anybody to their final destination because, first of all, it's kind of creepy and you don't know where you're gonna end up. And second of all, the only thing we cared about was the reality in the vehicle. Everything else was just noise. This next story is by one of my favorite authors in the NoSleep community of Reddit. Thank you, Ryan Peacock. Their username is Head of Spectra. And for all of those 007 fans out there, you know what it means. And for those of you like me who thought it actually meant a ghostly apparition because you thought the word was specter, except it's spelled different, it actually means, I had to look this up because I had no idea, it is an acronym for Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, and Extortion. Badass username. I will include a link to the story below so you guys can share it with friends or go back to read it. The story is titled, Follow. I'm a commuter. That's the only way you can get a job and a place to live in Toronto. I won't lie. The drive is bullshit, but I could be worse off. I could not have a job at all and the drive is preferable to that. I get paid well, and I honestly do love my job. The drive is the only thing I've got to bitch about, and it's honestly not that bad. The traffic getting out of Toronto is nothing short of bullshit though, and when I'm stuck in it, I get bored. Sometimes, I look at the cars around me. It's kind of like people watching. You can learn a lot about some people by looking at their car. Have you ever thought about doing that before? Picking a random car and following it to its destination? It's creepy, I know, but who knows what kind of life that stranger lives? Would they notice they were being followed? Would they call you out on it? Hard to say for sure, right? Last night, the car in front of me was a Nissan Rogue. It was a newer model. My brother has a 2008, and this looked almost identical to that. It had a dark brown color, and whoever owned it had put the name Veronica on the back. Nothing all that special, honestly. People had done weirder shit with their vehicles. I saw a guy with a sexy pirate girl dominating one side of his car. I thought it was for a company or something, but no, he just randomly had a sexy pirate girl on the side of his car. Back to the Nissan though. By itself, it wasn't anything special. Back to the Nissan though. By itself, it wasn't anything special. I wasn't even on the highway yet when I ended up behind it. I was on a crowded street trying to make the on-ramp for the highway. Still, as I sat behind the car, I tried to catch a glimpse inside to alleviate my own boredom. I probably wouldn't have remembered the details normally, but the longer I sat in traffic behind that car, the more I started to notice the movement inside of it. I dismissed it as some rowdy passengers in the back or an anxious family pet at first. It was just rapid movement darting between the seats. But the longer I watched, the less certain I was that it was either of those things. The way the shapes curved didn't seem to match the way people's arms moved, and it didn't seem to move like an animal. An animal would pace and would seem like more of a solid shape, not a flailing mass. I got tunnel vision, fascinating by what was inside this car. I watched it as intently as I could, despite the traffic. The Nissan never changed lanes or moved significantly, and I stayed close enough behind that no one could really get in between us. No matter what I thought up, I couldn't determine just what the fuck was in the back of that car, and it was driving me absolutely wild. It wasn't until I'd already passed it that I realized my turn onto the highway was coming up. I swore under my breath a little, but honestly, I wasn't all that bothered. Whatever was in the car ahead of me had my undivided attention, and I honestly wanted to follow it further, just to see where it went. For the next hour or so, not much happened. I sat in traffic with that strange car in front of me, and the longer I looked, the more I was puzzled by the mystery in front of me. It was honestly kind of hard not to be interested in it. However, the traffic was gradually thinning out now that rush hour was over, and we were getting closer and closer to the edge of town. If you've ever been to Toronto, the urban sprawl mostly grows like mold along the highways and the lakeshore. If you head east, it extends along the 403 all the way out towards Hamilton, and only after that does it start to die out. Past the 403, there's a more rural patch between that and Highway 401, and once you're over the 401, it's all farmland. Well, this car was headed straight for that farmland from the looks of it. It made some turns once the traffic started to thin out, and headed northeast. I barely noticed the landscape slowly changing from suburbs and strip malls to narrow back roads, fields, and trees. The sky was getting darker, and the car kept moving. As the light from the sky faded, I saw less and less of the movement in the back seat. But my attention was still captured. I had to see where this car was going. I vaguely recall having a few thoughts to the tune of, what the fuck am I doing? Outright stalking someone wasn't my usual after-work hobby. I should have been at a fast food restaurant grabbing a burger or at home watching TV. But despite telling myself that I just needed to turn around and go home, I found that I couldn't. Something made me stay behind that car. Something made me squint at its rear window, hoping to catch some glimpse of the thing in the back seat. The sky went pitch black as night fell. We'd been driving for almost 2 hours at that point. It was a little after 7 in the evening. I could see the faint outline of trees in the darkness ahead and had to do a double take. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks in the darkness, but I could have sworn there was something above the trees, shifting shapes that twisted and coiled in the sky. I thought I heard a crash of thunder, but it didn't seem to be storming. Not yet, at least. The car ahead of me had sped up a little. The paint that made up the lines in the road was faded, and they were nearly invisible. I was more so following the taillights of the Nissan ahead of me than I was actually following the road. We disappeared past the tree line, which blanketed us in an even deeper darkness. The Nissan ahead of me slowly got further and further away. I upped my speed to keep up with it. It was only after a few moments that I felt my car jerk as we left the pavement and wound up on a gravel road. The gravel had less traction and my speeding car almost lost control. I had to fight to get it back. I felt like I was lost in the middle of a void. I couldn't even see the trees around me anymore. My car radio had gone dead silent, and I realized I couldn't remember when it had shut off. I glanced at it and I didn't even see time being displayed. The world was pitch black. The only light was the taillights of the Nissan, and for the first time, I felt my heart racing. The familiar sinking sensation of dread blossomed in my gut like a weed. How long had we been driving? 2 hours? 3? 6? 12? Something felt very, very wrong. Every instinct I had told me to turn around, but for some stupid reason, I brushed all of my concerns aside. Everything would be fine. I just needed to follow, and soon, I would get my answer. When the Nissan stopped, so did I. I was a good 50 feet away, and I could see the driver's side door of the vehicle opening. I sat there, watching in suspense as the driver of the car stepped out. From what I could see, he was an old bastard, somewhere in his 80s or 90s, and he was about as thin as they got. I was sure the wind would blow him over. He was clearly balding, but still grew what little hair he had left out long. Even from the distance I was at, I could see his liver spots. He wore a very loose-fitting suit that should have fit someone else, a lot younger and taller than him. He shuffled out of the car and looked over at me. It was just a glance, but that glance said everything. He made it very clear that he knew I'd been following him. His face betrayed nothing. It was just a single stern expression. I watched him make his way to the back of the car and opened up the trunk. I stepped out of my car, leaving it running as the back gate of the Nissan swung open. The old man blocked my view of whatever was inside, but I could see parts of it around him. Long, sticky tendrils clung to the sides of the car. I could see things that almost looked like tentacles swaying gently. The old man looked back at me again, his expression stern, yet sorrowful. He didn't speak, but there was a question on his lips, something he needed to ask. "Are you sure you're ready?" My answer was yes, but that wasn't the truth. Not really. Honestly, I don't know if I could ever be ready to see what was in that car. I continued my slow advance, eyes fixated on the unidentifiable shape behind the man. I only glanced at him once. I remember noticing how, when I was just a few feet away from him, he closed his eyes and exhaled. Slowly he shuffled out of the way, and I saw. Oh yes, I saw everything. "You followed," the old man said. His voice was weak and raspy. "It's yours now." He sighed and turned away from me as I reached out to the thing in the car. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. It was beautiful and horrible all at once. It was so cold to the touch, and yet soft. Reverently, I lifted it out of the back of his Nissan and cradled it to my chest. I admired it, then looked up at the old man one last time. I saw him sprawled out on the ground a few feet away from me. I knew he was dead. Slowly, I took my prize back to my car. I set it in my back seat where it would be comfortable. Then I got behind the wheel again. It felt good being behind the wheel. I began to drive, going around the stopped Nissan and onto the road ahead. The Nissan and its dead driver were soon far away in my rearview mirror as I drove onwards into the dark. I looked back at the thing in my backseat a few times. I thought about going home, but no. My new passenger didn't want to go home with me. My new passenger wanted to drive, so we drove. We drove until the sun came up, and we will continue to drive. It's funny. I would have thought my car would have run out of gas by now, or that I'd feel tired or hungry, but I don't. Not really. I saw a few more lines in my face when I looked in the rearview mirror this morning though, and I think I spotted some gray hairs this morning as well. Oh well, I'm not concerned. I'm still only 22. There's still a lot of miles in me yet. I should get back to driving though. My passenger doesn't like to be kept waiting. The end. Alright friends, what was that creature? We can assume that it takes over control of the mind. Obviously, it needs a host to feed off of, so I'm thinking that it's some kind of parasite. We never did get an incredibly detailed description of what the creature actually looks like, but we know that it's powerful, has tentacles, uses some sort of telekinesis to control not just humans, but objects like the vehicle. And I questioned why the creature preferred its victim to be constantly driving. I feel like the story should serve as a warning to people who sit in traffic, bored, and like to look around at the cars and the people inside of them. Or you might just end up becoming a babysitting 7-course meal for a tentacle parasite pet. Now, I highly encourage new couples to try the night driving date at least once, especially if they're just getting to know one another. There are, however, a few rules I'd like to share with you to make sure that you get home as safely as possible. The first rule is quite obvious. Make sure that you have a full tank of gas before you take off on this adventure. Rule number 2, be sure to respect the no trespassing rules. If you hit the end of a road or a new road altogether and it says no trespassing, don't go down that road because you might not like where it ends up. Rule number 3 is that you never, ever follow a car to its final destination. Rule number 4 is that you make sure that you respect the speed limit in neighborhoods. The final rule, and my favorite rule, make sure that you kiss at every red light. Thank you for being here with me. Subscribe and like, and join me on the next episode of Shadow Stories with me.